Hello, welcome to another edition of the Intel with Greg Cosell on the Inside the Birds platform. I'm Geoff Mosher from Inside the Birds alongside my co-host Adam Caplan, and with us, as always, breaking down the prospects is the star of the show, Greg Cosell. Greg, we've put it off for a while, but we can no longer do it. We've got to talk quarterbacks. I think we've probably done the quarterback episode with you in the past a little earlier. And I would say Adam and I have talked about this a lot. Don't think the Eagles in particular are going to take a quarterback in the first round. But one thing you can never do with this team, and they make their intentions very clear, is that they put as much homework into the position annually as any other team, and nothing should ever surprise us when it comes to the Eagles and quarterbacks. So we slam the door on nothing as far as whatever round.
You just have no idea. You have no idea.
Absolutely. So with that said, we know there are a bunch of quarterbacks, and we know the Eagles have done a lot of homework on them. So let's start with the guy who has a lot of local ties in Kenny Pickett. He's a guy from New Jersey, I believe Monmouth County, New Jersey. He was supposed to go to Temple to play for Matt Rule. We'll get into that in a little bit. Then he wound up going to there and then transferring to Pitt. Really wasn't a name that a lot of people, I think, were familiar with until his senior season. So what did you see this year, and did you go back at all and look at before this year to see why all of a sudden he was the guy that people started talking about?
Well, Geoff, if I could, I think before we talk about specific quarterbacks, I think we need to talk about transition in terms of traits. Sure. This is the time of year where everybody throws around the word traits and nobody says what they are. No, I'm being serious. And I think before we decide how a guy projects and transitions to the NFL, we need to talk about what makes quarterbacks, for the most part. There's not one size fits all, and it's not a mathematical equation like 2 and 2 is 4, but there are certain things that would probably be considered, and I've heard this phrase from a lot of coaches, there's certain things that coaches view as non-negotiable. And I think you have to start with that. And it's interesting that we're talking about Kenny Pickett because he falls into that category. But I'm going to give you some things that I view from doing this for a long time as important. There's repetitive mechanics. That's one reason why Tom Brady is Tom Brady and a Hall of Famer, because he does the same thing all the time. There's elimination and isolation, which people like to use the word processing, but I would take it a step further. It's understanding what you're seeing before the snap of the ball in the pre-snap phase so that the post-snap phase is easier. So you can execute within the structure of your offense. There's accuracy, and then there's the subset of accuracy, which is ball location, which is really being precise with where you have to throw the ball. There's touch, and there's velocity. There's pocket movement, and then there's second reaction movement. There's a physical element to the position. You've got to have some physical toughness. There's poise and composure. Now, there's probably 10 more, but let's just start there for a minute. I think you have to be able to do these things, and these are traits. I don't think you can just say that, a guy, he can throw it hard, so he's got great traits. Well, that's not in and of itself a trait, a standalone trait. You can't just say, well, God, he can run really fast. That's not a standalone trait to be a high-level quarterback in the NFL. There's a lot of nuance and detail and subtlety to playing the quarterback position. And when you watch college players, you have to get a sense of how they fit in to those more nuanced elements of playing the position. Because if they don't, then they have to be taught all that.
Sure.
And then two things happen. Obviously, the learning curve is longer. And secondly, and maybe most important, if you have to play a guy early, your playbook shrinks. And offensive coaches hate that.
Right.
As you guys know. So you have to think in terms of, as I look at these quarterbacks, what is the context in which I am evaluating them?
That's a really good point.
That's the bottom line point. You asked me about Kenny Pickett, who went from throwing 13 touchdowns to 42 or 47, whatever the number. The number in and of itself is not relevant in a strict sense. look, Joe Burrow went from 16 to 60.
Right.
The number in and of itself is not relevant. It's the context in which those numbers were produced.
Sure. So maybe,
So,
Greg, a better first question for you would have been, now that I think about what you're saying, this quarterback class in general that we're about to talk to is clearly not as heralded as some in the past. Obviously, there's a chance that none go in the top 5, and it's been a while since you've seen that. So in your across-the-board evaluation of these quarterbacks, why is this class not as up there? What are those qualifications, those basic qualifications that teams look for, that you look for when you break down tape, that you don't really see as much of in this year's class?
Because there's more concerns in the tape for a number of these quarterbacks than in previous years. Now, if those concerns get ironed out, Geoff, we could have some good quarterbacks. But there's more concerns when you look at their tape that show up on tape within the context of what I just spoke about. So that's the reason.
Gotcha.
But again, when I hear people say, oh, he's got great traits, my first thought is, can you please tell me what that means in your mind? Different people, I'm speaking to a quarterback coach tomorrow who's a really good friend of mine. And we talk all the time because thankfully he respects what I have to say about quarterbacks, and we have great discussions about quarterbacks. And you have to get a feel for what NFL teams actually look for in quarterbacks. Why are quarterbacks successful in the league? That's why things like completion percentage in college are meaningless. You can throw bubble screens to the wide side of the field in college, and the three of us can complete those balls. The wide side of the field is like the Grand Canyon in college football. You can't just say, well, he completed 69% of his passes, so he's accurate. That's a meaningless statement.
Right.
Let me ask you this, Greg. Who are the people you learned the quarterback position from in your years of watching tape?
Number one, and probably the best part of my professional career, was Bill Walsh. I probably spent 4 to 5 meaningful amounts of time with Bill Walsh, basically explaining the quarterback position to me. And I start there. So my point being is this, and there have been many others. Brian Billick is someone I've known very well over the years. Al Saunders, a number of coaches who are still coaching, who I don't want to mention right now. Adam, you can appreciate that. Just like you talk to a lot of guys who tell you a lot of really good things. But these are guys that are out, so they're not coaching at the moment. I know I'm missing Mike Martz. I've been very fortunate to have numerous conversations with over the years. So I learned from people a lot smarter than I am. And the one thing that I've taken away from all that is I evaluate the position to play it the right way every snap. It's not a let's go make a play position. Just because coaches say that in a press conference doesn't mean that's the way it's coached. And I've said this before, and people who listen to me, and it's a repeat for people who listen to me. Coaches in practice don't roll the ball out and say, you know what, guys, the plan today is let's go make some plays.
It's not basketball, right?
That's not how they coach the position.
Right.
So I'll tell you, a really smart guy who was a player and who I've spent time talking with, and he could be a coach, he probably doesn't want to be, is Rich Gannon. Rich Gannon is incredibly intelligent. And you talk to him about the quarterback position, the nuance, the detail, because he wasn't a guy with a power arm. He had to play exactly the right way every snap. That's the way it's coached.
Right.
So, when Ron Jaworski was in here for years and years, and Adam knows this, and then we'll get to the guys, and Adam knows this because he'd be here, a number of times every year. Jaws would always say, and I learned this from him as well. He said, we're not evaluating guys to go 8-8. We're evaluating guys to be Super Bowl champions.
Right.
A lot of guys can go 8-8.
Yep.
That's not how you evaluate quarterbacks.
So in that point, Greg, you made me think of something. So if you look at this class overall, you might say, don't settle for 8. There might be some 8-8 type quarterbacks, decent, above average quarterbacks. So that's why the value of the position in this draft, from talking to people, Geoff has gone through the same thing. It's just not that high. Look, we might see 4 quarterbacks go in the first round. That's not my point. The point is, you're settling from tape study if you take a guy high at this position based on what you're talking about. And other people agree with you, by the way.
Well, and the other factor is coaches always look at what they believe can be coached. And that's the other factor that I think a lot of people don't take into account is it's easy to say, well, Desmond Ridder is a little deliberate and Desmond Ridder at times drops his arm angle. Yeah, he does. Coaches, I'm sure, feel they can correct both of those things. Now, whether they can or not, whether it comes out once he plays, that remains to be seen. But those two things are coachable. So therefore, they're theoretically fixable. So if you watch him on tape now, you say, hey, he's a little deliberate and he drops his arm angle, and that causes some accuracy issues because the tape tells you that he misses too many layups. So his ball location is nowhere near as precise as it needs to be a higher quality NFL quarterback. But those things are fixable. So anyway, now let's get to Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, we can get into Kenny Pickett, but before kind of leading into that.
I love these conversations. I mean,
yeah, this is great.
I love these conversations.
I'm just curious because this is a very diverse set of quarterbacks and what they do well and don't do well compared to maybe some others in the class. And then you have injuries factoring in for even some more. When you looked at the tape of all the top 6-7 guys, forget medicals, forget what you don't know about who has the best tape of everybody that you watched?
Kenny Pickett.
Okay. Why?
I'll tell you why. And we won't, we don't need to spend, a ton of time on each guy. But if you look at Kenny Pickett, he has a profile that is demanded at the NFL level. He has vision. He has progression reading skills with full field reading concepts because that's what he was taught at Pittsburgh by Mark Whipple, who has an NFL background. He throws with timing. There's a sense of anticipation. His ball placement is, relatively speaking, precise. Let's say it's not quite as consistently as precise as Mac Jones was, but it's precise. He's got athleticism and mobility to both move in the pocket and be a second reaction playmaker. So Kenny Pickett has traits that transition to the NFL. He's an executor of an offense. He's a ball distributor, and he has mobility to make some second reaction plays. Now, having said that, there's a couple of things that need to be cleaned up. And if they're not cleaned up, it would pose a problem. He's a little sloppy with his drop at times. He does not plant his back foot with a firm base. So his balance at times is not there to deliver the football. There were times, too many times, in which he broke the pocket early, overreacting to pressure. And I put that in quotes because it wasn't pressure by NFL standards. So he left the pocket too early, and he left what we say are clean throws on the field. So these are things with Kenny Pickett that have to be cleaned up. Are they fixable? They're fixable. Then there's the hand size issue, which I've gone back and forth with coaches. He fumbled 27 times in his college career. So you have to look at all 27 fumbles. And in true confession, I have not. But so I'm not going to sit here and say that I have, because I've not. But you have to look at each one individually. And the reason you do, just like interceptions, is you have to find out why that happened. Because you can't just say, oh, he fumbled 27 times. Just like you can't say he threw 15 interceptions. That's too many. You've got to look at each one as an individual play and understand why they happen. It's not a number on a page.
Yeah.
Did you real quick? Did you do that for at least his senior year and try to?
Yeah,
see
I saw the ones all this year, and I don't. And I'm being honest with you, Geoff. I don't know the answer to that, so I'm not going to make something up.
Gotcha.
You guys know me well enough. If I don't know, I tell you, I don't know the answer to that.
Because it's interesting when we go back to Matt Ryan's final year at Boston College. He had a high number of interceptions.
He threw 19 interceptions, and everybody was worried about it.
Right. And the reason why I brought it up was, so I talked to a coach leading up to that draft. He said he had no issue with it. Yeah. Because he checked into, obviously he graded the tape, and he also talked to the coaches and got their opinion of why those interceptions were thrown. Because if you don't get context, you don't want to make excuses for people.
Yeah.
But you want to have good information so you can make a better decision. Now, that being said, let's move to the top 10. There are 3 teams that need a quarterback right now. for sure. The Panthers need a left tackle quarterback. Anyone who follows the Panthers knows this. The Falcons need an answer quarterback. Marcus Mariota is a placeholder right now. And the Seahawks need a quarterback. So Kenny Pickett, now I know you don't go by round grade and all that. That's not my point here. But you've talked about him. Is he a guy you believe, based on your tape study, would be ready to play year one?
Yes. And I think if Carolina to me is a fascinating team. They clearly need O-line help. Clearly. Although they have addressed that in have they not, Adam? I think that didn't they sign Bradley Bozeman and
yes.
One other guy who's not bad. I can't think of his name right now.
They're good. The only position that they're not good is at left tackle. They cannot line up today. Now, talking to them, they like Brady Christensen. If they had to, because he showed that he could play just about any position,
right?
He would be their fallback option. But they have to get a left tackle now.
Well, let's assume for the moment that the offensive line at least becomes average to above average, and I know that might be a reach at this moment in time, but let's assume that for the moment. I think Kenny Pickett fits well there because they have a run game. They still have Christian McCaffrey, and they have a run game, and they actually have pretty good receivers. So, to me, that would be a really good spot for him because they could line up, they could run the ball with some kind of ratio. In other words, in an ideal world, because their defense is actually pretty good too, he would not have to be asked to drop back 40, 45 times a game. They're not going to be in those kinds of games more than likely. Okay. And that division is a little up in the air right now. So it's not like there's one team that's going to go 15 and 3 right now, or I guess there's 17 games, I lose track of this, so, I think for someone like Kenny Pickett, that would be a really good spot because he's used to playing under center. You get the run game, you get the conventional play action pass game with the quarterback under center. You get a way to help him define reads and throws. And it would be a really good spot for him to comfortably acclimate to the NFL.
All right, real quick before we move off him, I just want to ask because we just talked about Matt Ryan. He had all those interceptions, still went number 1 overall. We have seen quarterbacks.
Actually, he went number 3 in the draft.
I'm sorry, 3. That's right. Yeah. Right. We've seen quarterbacks of all varieties go in the top 10, and almost all of them, many of them, have had some type of concerns coming out of college.
Because no one, Geoff, comes in as a finished product. That's the bottom line.
So what is it about
Trevor Lawrence is not generational, contrary to what people say.
Sure. So what is it about Pickett? Do you think that even his concerns are somehow a little bit more grave than I guess others who have gone top 5? And again, maybe Pickett does go in the top 5 or 10, and we just don't know. But he's not getting that kind of accolade right now. So who knows?
It's a great question, and it was a question I asked at the Combine to some coaches I know well. And what I heard was, and I'm not sure what to make of this. I'm not saying they're wrong because they do more work than I do, believe me. And I work a little ridiculously, as you guys know, but they do even more. I kept hearing, well, he doesn't have a special trait. And I guess the way I'd answer that, and I'm not comparing any quarterback to great ones in a strict sense, so I don't want people to think I'm comparing Kenny Pickett to Tom Brady, okay? But in year 2 or 3, would anybody have said Tom Brady has a special trait? I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think they would have said that. He's in his second or third year. I mean, I know he won the Super Bowl in his first year as a starter. I know that. And I guess that's not a trait that, and the team was built totally differently than if you talk to their coaches, they'll tell you that Tom was essentially just kind of a system guy. They had a great run game. They had a dominant defense back then that people have forgotten about. So, no one, I'm not suggesting, as is anyone else who likes Kenny Pickett, suggesting that he's Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. I don't want people to come away from this conversation thinking he's that guy. He's not. But if you can execute an offense, like, let me ask you this, and this might be a bad name in the minds of people because I think there's other factors involved that go beyond the field. But if Kenny Pickett is a better Kirk Cousins, is that okay?
I think so.
You know,
I mean,
people
I'm one of those
say,
who thinks Kirk Cousins is better than people.
Doesn't want anything. You know, we all get the immediate responses. We get all that.
Right.
You know,
right.
But the flip side of that is every year Kirk Cousins throws 30-plus touchdowns and about 8 interceptions.
Right.
So there's other factors, as Adam knows from talking to coaches, that we're not going to get into here. I don't get into those anyway, because those are things other than speaking to people I don't know about. But special is one of those words. Again, that's another term that people throw out there that no one describes what that means.
Right.
We can all see that Josh Allen is special. That's a classic. You can see that. But there's a lot of quarterbacks. Is Matt Ryan special?
No, but you could win with him. I mean, the Falcons got the Super Bowl with him.
Right.
If by chance they happen to win that Super Bowl, Matt Ryan would be considered a potential Hall of Famer.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a fair point. It's good stuff.
So I mean, special. I mean, if you can execute the offense the way it needs to be executed, snap after snap after snap, quarter after quarter after quarter, game after game after game, week after week after week, whatever, you're a pretty good NFL quarterback.
By the way, that's pretty special.
Yeah, it is when you really think about it.
That is good. That is good. Okay, let's move on to Malik Willis from Liberty, a guy who does have special traits. I would say some would say the ability to.
And you know what I would ask you? Serious question. I'm not trying to be a jerk. What are the special traits you're referring to?
Well, I mean, obviously the arm strength that he has and the ability to make second reaction plays and run out of the pocket. But of course, as you mentioned, that's not necessarily the key to great quarterbacking all the time. It's
and what he has. Here's what Malik Willis has. He has a ridiculous arm. I've actually stood next to him when he threw the ball. I was at an event with him last summer. It's the term someone used at this event, standing next to me. They said he's got a hand cannon. It's a great term. He can throw it really hard. He can run fast, and he does have really, really good second reaction ability. And he's capable of making outstanding throws at the intermediate and vertical levels. He's got both a live arm and a power arm. He showed flashes in his tape, flashes. And that's the term I use when you don't see it a lot. He showed flashes of being patient in the pocket. He showed flashes of pocket movement, which is different than leaving the pocket. We know that he gives an offense a design quarterback run game, which if he is a starter year one, that offense will absolutely do that with him because it'll get him comfortable. He's a strong, powerful runner. He's an explosive athlete. So he has things you cannot teach. So now the question with him becomes, if you start looking at traits, is you start getting into the elimination and isolation, his ability to see things both before the snap and after the snap, because he was asked to run an offense that didn't really do that, which, again, not his fault, but you don't see that on tape. So the question becomes, can he do that now? And what's the learning curve to do that? So that becomes the mechanics are also, I think, repetitive mechanics are something you want to work on with Malik Willis. So these are things you have to figure out. What kind of offense? If he goes, Geoff, in the top 10, let's say Carolina drafts him, they decide they like him, and they decide, you know what? We know what Sam Darnold is. We're going to play Malik Willis. They're going to have to make some concessions early on, clearly, as to what their offense is going to look like, because it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve.
Let me ask you this real quick then. If Kenny Pickett were not in the draft, all right, I asked you earlier who's got the best overall quarterback tape. You said Kenny Pickett. Take Kenny Pickett out. Who has the next best overall quarterback tape?
If you're just talking about quarterback tape from college football, I'd probably say Matt Corral.
Matt Corral. Okay. All right. Interesting. So, and then one other thing, I hate the comparison game. I hate it, but I'm gonna.
But you're gonna make it
anyway. I'm gonna ask the question because you said strong, powerful arm and dynamic runner. So a lot of people will think Lamar Jackson when you say those words as a quarterback. As far as Malik Willis, comparable, not comparable? Would you build an offense
Willis's arm is
that way?
stronger than Jackson's, and Jackson is a better runner.
Okay.
Jackson's
That's what
a
I figured
freak.
you'd
I
say.
wouldn't call Willis a freak. Jackson's a freak.
All right.
And Willis has a stronger, more powerful arm than Lamar.
Gotcha.
But you raise a very fascinating question in this sense. Because of the college offense that he ran, if you draft Malik Willis and you decide he's your week 1 starter or your week 2 or week 3 starter, it's the point I made a moment ago, Geoff. Are you essentially going to try to run an offense that the Ravens ran in the first 2 years of Lamar, where the foundation, and I know this from speaking to coaches, where the foundation of the Ravens offense was Lamar as a runner, not as a passer. They knew that those early years, he wasn't quite a good enough passer for them to run what would be considered a more conventional NFL offense. So they ran an offense. They were the only team in the league to run that kind of offense, because that played to what Lamar did exceptionally well, was very comfortable with as he was going through the learning curve, which he's getting much better at as he's playing more. But as he was going through the learning curve of the other things you need to do to be an NFL quarterback. Would you have to do that with Malik Willis or not? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
Greg, when you look at the quarterback position, your years of watching tape, how have you evolved? Because you talk about Willis and other challenges that you have when you're watching tape to project what that will look like the next level. How has your evaluations changed at the quarterback position over time?
It's a great question, Adam, and I go back and forth on that because we've had a lot of great quarterbacks in the NFL who are still playing who don't move. They're pocket players. Tom Brady. We mentioned Matt Ryan, Drew Brees. When I say don't move, they're not second reaction movers. They can move within the pocket, which I would view as an area the size of a boxing ring or smaller. They're very, very good at that, but they certainly don't move out of the pocket. Then you have I hate using this term, but just for the sake of conversation, a new breed of quarterback that can make outstanding plays getting outside the pocket, outside the structure of the offense. The Josh Allens, the Patrick Mahomes, the Russell Wilsons, who's been playing for quite a while. I'm sure I'm missing guys. There's plenty of others. So the question is, to relate to your point, Adam, what's the balance? Okay? Because there is not a coach who you will talk to who will not tell you that quarterbacks that tend to leave the pocket will often leave throws on the field. Now, they might make then a great play, and it's like the old basketball, when a guy takes a deep shot and it's no, yes, because it goes in. That's kind of the whole deal. But so where's the balance between the guys that leave the pocket versus the guys that are so good at all the details, the nuance, and the subtleties of the position that they can be really good without leaving the pocket? And that's a really interesting question and a very individualized question.
Feels like that line moves differently for different guys because of their own natural abilities.
See, because the problem you face, and this is the conversation that I've had with so many coaches, and I hope people understand a lot of what I say comes from sharing information and having great conversations with coaches in addition to my own tape study, because I'm one of those guys when I watch tape, and I've said this to Adam 100 times, I watch tape, and I'm sure most people think I know a decent amount, but when I watch tape, I think there's 10 things that I'm missing that if a coach was sitting here, they'd be telling me that I missed. So that's the way my mind works, which is very frustrating for me because I feel like I want to know all those things, and maybe I do to some degree, but I feel like I don't. So anyway, Greg, the point I'm trying to make is this, is at some point in the NFL, you need to have a drop back passing game, okay? Not an RPO game, not a bang play action game, not a regular play action game, but at some point in the NFL, you got to drop back and throw the football. Mm-hmm. When the defense has a tactical advantage, meaning that it's 3rd and 9, meaning that you're down by 14 middle third quarter, and the flow of the game is such that, you know what, you got to drop back and throw the football. So the question is, what is involved in doing that? And if you can't do that, at some point, that's going to bite you in the you-know-what. And you can talk about all the other great stuff, but if you can't do that, you're going to have a hard time somewhere along the line. And that's just the way it is in the NFL.
There's that saying in the NFL, and this goes with coaches too, what's your act two? If they figure this out, what's your next move?
Right.
And that's like Josh Allen, okay, superior athlete for the position, huge arm, big kid. Problem is, he was horribly inaccurate. Through great coaching, give Brian Daboll and Ken Dorsey credit, he turned his career around. And you could argue, as you said,
he can now drop back and throw the football.
Right. You might say he's the best quarterback right now in the National Football League. No one's probably going to argue against that if they've really seen him a lot. But it's funny because just talking to coaches, I'm sure Geoff's going through the same thing as well. It seems like everyone is evolved now. They don't like. There's one coach, Greg, you and I know pretty well, who admitted to me privately that he made a major mistake on Mahomes. He looked at him one way. He fell for the narrative.
Right.
Plus, the tape showed it of Cliff Kingsbury's offense doesn't really transfer well. He was wild. A lot of off-schedule throws didn't make any sense. But this goes to coaching and the intelligence factor. Mahomes happens to be very smart,
very intelligent. And by the way,
the coaching.
A lot of people fell for it's not the right word. That's what his tape showed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
There are a lot of people. That's why Mahomes was the 10th pick in the draft and not a higher pick, because there were major concerns about his ability to function within structure on a down-to-down basis. But he's a super intelligent kid, and he gets it. And in fact, I would argue that this year he really, even though he had that bad second half against Cincinnati, which was unfortunate, I would almost argue this year he took a major step forward because he struggled early, and then he really understood how to rein himself in. And I'm sure with Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy and Mike Kafka, was there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody I'm sure had a hand, but you're dealing with a really smart kid. So, but the point I'm trying to make is simply this: at some point in the NFL, you're going to have to drop back and throw the football. Right. So all this idea of, you can do design runs. He's really fast. He's all this. He's all that. That's great until you have to throw it.
Right. Right. So you had said if we took Kenny Pickett away from the conversation, that the next best quarterback tape is, I believe you said, was Matt Corral. So let's talk about Matt Corral.
But that's college quarterback tape. He's got there are some questions with him too, and let's go to him now.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Matt Corral has a great snap delivery. I mean, he's got one of those guys, he can snap it off. It looks good coming out of his hand. He's got good velocity. He can make, to be as cliched as one can possibly be, he can make all the throws. But he ran a highly schemed tempo, high percentage defined one read pass game at Ole Miss. It was all RPOs. It was all quick play action with the occasional deep shot. Now, are there examples beyond that? Of course there are. But again, to use the term I used earlier, they're flashes. So the question is, how quickly can he learn an NFL offense with, everything that goes with it? And how fast can he see it when it's not a one read throw? A lot of throws in college are literally no read throws. Here's where the ball's going. Here's the play. That's who you're throwing it to. That's almost a no-read throw.
Right.
Right. So, but there's a lot to like about Matt Corral. He's certainly not going to run as much in the NFL as he did in college, although he ended up being bigger. I've been around Matt Corral. He was bigger than I thought just seeing him in person and seeing him on tape. He ended up being 6'1" and 5'8" and 212. Now, that's fine. There's no problem with that. Although I will say this, I think he plays a little short the way he plays, but that's maybe some disagree with me, but he's got a lot of good traits. So, we'll see. Matt Corral to me is somewhat of a wild card in this draft because I bet there's a lot. I would bet, and you guys might know this more than I, I'll be talking to more people in the next week, but I've been just grinding, trying to watch every position, as you guys know. I would bet that he's very polarizing. I would bet there are some people that love Matt Corral, and then some people that have some serious questions about Matt Corral. Adam, would that be fair based on your
Yes.
conversation?
It's funny. I didn't think of using the wild card term because that's always the best. But I would say he's one where you're not going to get everyone to agree on him. There's usually one or two quarterbacks in every draft where, as we all know, these people see the same tape and they come up with completely different opinions. I don't know how that happens. Greg,
Yeah,
you would,
well, I'll tell you why that happens.
Yeah.
Because you can make a list of quarterback traits, and if you made a list of 15, every coach would probably have the same 15, but it's the value each coach ascribes to specific traits. Each coach ascribes different value to different traits. So we could make the same list, but, Nick Sirianni might ascribe value to these 4 traits, and Kevin Stefanski might ascribe 4 other traits that Nick Sirianni doesn't have. So that's why guys have different points of view. It's the value they ascribe to the different traits.
So I think when you talk about polarizing and different traits, that is also sort of the feedback I've gotten, maybe Adam too, on Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. I've talked to people who really like the idea, the upside of Desmond Ridder,
Right.
And some who think that there's just so much work that needs to be done there that you're just not sure. So how do you see Desmond?
And I think that what you just said is extremely fair, Geoff, because the thing that stands out about Ridder, which is a really good thing too, and by the way, it's a trade, he is incredibly poised and composed. He just looks so comfortable playing the game. But I think he's a little deliberate in what he does. He needs to speed up. I mentioned the delivery, which needs to be changed. It's a little bit elongated at times. There's a lot of motion in his delivery that can impact ball location. He does have that tendency to drop his arm angle, and that also causes problems with ball location. So he misses too many layups, and you can't miss layups in the NFL, because the bottom line is you could do everything right. And I'm not saying he does do everything right, but let's say you do everything right from a mechanics standpoint. But if you can't throw the ball where you want to, then you've got nothing, because it's hard in the NFL. But I would say that Ridder has a lot of things going for him. He's comfortable in the pocket. Even though he's athletic, he does not leave the pocket unless it's absolutely necessary. He doesn't break down. He's very comfortable playing within the confines of the pocket and the structured pass game. And there were snaps in which he showed subtle and efficient pocket movement to slide away from pressure and make throws. I think Ridder would really fit best in an offense like the Browns, like the Vikings, like theoretically the Titans, where the run game is sort of the starting point, and everything you do in the pass game, not everything, obviously, you do have to drop back, but where the pass game has a strong build off the run game and its principles. The only problem with Ridder, because of the delivery issues, is he's not as good a thrower on the run as you'd like him to be, and he needs work on that as well.
The other knocks on him is, he's just under 6'4", 6'3", and 3/8, but he's only 211 pounds. You want him, you can put weight on him. You'd like him to be in the 220 range. I remember Joe Flacco telling me as a rookie, he might have been 225, 227. He wound up getting up to 245 plus. So that shouldn't be a determinant
Right.
of liking a player, but I understand why coaches mention that. But the thing that they mentioned, you both mentioned, particularly you, Greg, it's too many missed throws. Like, they have a real problem with it. But you said to start our show today, you think some of his issues with mechanics can be cleaned up, correct?
Mechanics can be coached. Now, the question is, can they truly be fixed? They can be coached. I mean, that you can speed up a delivery a little bit. In other words, you can't change a guy's delivery, but, for those who remember back this, God, I can't believe how long it is now. But when Kerry Collins came out of Penn State, and Geoff, I'm sure you remember being a Penn Stater, he had that really long delivery. It got sped up a little bit in the NFL. It never became compact because you can't change it quite that much, but you can help Desmond Ridder. And from what I've heard, he's a very coachable kid and a really good kid. But it's still an unknown. It's still an unknown. So that's when we started this conversation. You asked me about quarterbacks as a whole. They all have some things that need to be cleaned up and worked on. If they get really cleaned up in a beautiful way, they could become good players. If they don't, they could become average players at best, and that's what we have.
Greg, we all know medicals play a huge role in the development of any prospect, but especially quarterbacks. A guy that I got very good, I'd say, feedback on as far as just being a thrower of the football is Nevada's Carson Strong. But as Adam has talked about, we've talked about on the podcast. Adam, why don't you just go through, because you have the specifics on the knees and the injuries that he's had, right?
Yeah, one of them had a surgery with two of them within, I'm going to say 9 months to a year of each other. Medic, he doesn't move around all that great. I watched him at the Senior Bowl. I was on the field, so I was able to see him.
Yeah,
but he's big kid, big arm, as you were mentioning. But I wondered, that's why we have Greg here. What does his tape look like to you, Greg?
Well, the one thing I will say is Davis Mills last year at Stanford, he had a big knee brace on, and a lot of coaches were really bothered by that. Then he came into the league this year, obviously started numerous games, no knee brace. He's never going to be, a special mover, but he moved a little bit. So I don't know what Carson Strong's situation is in that regard. If when the knee brace comes off, if it ever does, if that would make him a little better, because when you watch his tape, he's the old school quarterback. His game's built on beating you from the pocket. There's no significant second reaction ability. He's got a good arm, but I would say, and maybe it's a function of the knee, his arm's good, and they push the ball down the field. So you see intermediate and vertical throws. But I would say, and like I said, it could be a function of his lower body and the knee, but it wasn't a great arm. Now, maybe it's a great arm just as an arm, but maybe because of the knee, it just didn't come across that way. But quarterbacks like Carson Strong, he has to become really, really good at all the nuances and subtleties and disciplines of the position. He's got to be able to work out of muddied pockets, contested throws. In the NFL, if you're a pocket quarterback, you have got to make contested throws. There's going to be people around you, far more than in college, far more. There's a coach I know extremely well who said all he looks at now, and he's turned out to be right over the last 5 years, all he looks at are contested throws. He says, I don't waste my time with RPOs, with bubble screens, with quick game throws where the ball's out in 1 second. He says, that's a waste of my time, because that's not going to tell me whether a guy's going to be a good NFL quarterback. He's going to have to make contested throws. So the Carson Strongs of the world have to be able to make throws when there's people around you. And by that, I don't mean that you're going to get smacked in the mouth. I mean just that there are people around you that just make it a little uncomfortable.
Muddied pocket.
Yes. Muddied pocket, noisy pocket, contested throws. If you're a pocket quarterback and you're not leaving the pocket, you have got to be able to make those throws. So he's going to have to master that if he's going to be a higher level NFL starter.
You want to ask about Sam Howell? I guess that would be we'll finish it up.
Sam Howell, we saw at the Senior Bowl. Greg, what do you think of his tape?
Yeah, I know Sam. I really like him personally. So, it's funny. You get to know these kids. Some events I've been to where they actually act like I know what I'm talking about. So I get to know some of these kids. So he's a great kid. I really like Sam Howell. I actually asked him at the Combine when I saw him. I said, what do you think of your year? And to his credit, he said, I wasn't very good. I tried to do way too much.
Oh, interesting.
So I give him credit for that. And it was evident on tape. He lost all his receivers, and you could tell watching the tape that the last place he wanted to be was the pocket. He would drop back and he would take off. He's actually a pretty good runner, but again, he's 6 feet 1/4 inch. He's not going to, even though he's got a bulky body, that's not the way he's going to make his living in the NFL. I would say he's got some good traits, though. He's got a pretty strong arm. He can drive the ball at the intermediate and deeper level, so it's a very good deep ball. I think in that offense, and maybe I'm wrong, obviously I'm not the coach coaching him, but I thought there were a lot of predetermined throws, and when those throws were not there, I think he just took off. So again, because he did that this year, Is that something you'll see him do more and more of? I don't know. But he definitely can move within the pocket. He can work through progressions. I have seen him do that. We know he has a playmaking dimension. He's really competitive. He battles. He competes. I think he's mentally and physically tough. Again, another guy that a lot of what he did at college was RPOs, the quick play action game. But he showed enough flashes as a pocket quarterback to get you excited and to think that, hey, this guy can be a good quarterback. But I think to me, it will really depend on where he goes and how he gets coached. I think he's of this group. I think very much he may be the litmus test for that of this group more than any of the others.
Greg, I'm so glad you brought that point up. Coaching matters. It's so underrated, but should be the most important thing when you draft a player. Who's going to coach him?
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to criticize. There are a couple staffs where you talk to coaches around the league, they wonder, like, how is this quarterback going to be coached? Because some teams will hire a guy who's never coached quarterbacks before. Like, this guy was coaching offensive line, now he's coaching quarterbacks. So he's a friend of the head coach. Well, that's not good. You want to have someone who's helped. He hasn't had to coach the guy quarterbacks 10 years, but you want someone who's done it before. That's
so glad you said that, because, and this comes from Bill Walsh, you asked me earlier. To me, and even Ron Jaworski, you've heard this story, Adam, talking about when Dick Vermeil brought Sid Gilman in, when they started from scratch.
Yes.
Jaws had already played 7 years in the NFL, and Sid Gilman started from taking the snap under center. To me, it has to start with mechanics. Unless the defense demands otherwise, you should be throwing the ball the same way every single time. We've gotten so used now because some guys are really good at it and it looks cool and we see it 1,000 times. But the game for a quarterback is not built on trick shot throws. Are there quarterbacks who can do it? We've seen Mahomes 100 times. Obviously, Stafford made that great throw to Cooper Kupp in the Super Bowl. Stafford was doing it way before Mahomes even did it. And that's, hey, if it's needed, that's fine. But that's not the way you should be teaching quarterbacks to play. It has to be mechanics, repetitive mechanics over and over and over again. And it gets to another balance with coaching that, and I'm not a coach, so, hey, there could be coaches who'll tell me I'm an idiot. But it's the balance between teaching mechanics and fundamentals versus teaching scheme. What's the balance when you're a coach? You've got to teach guys to throw the ball the right way all the time. It's like a baseball pitcher. You don't want to throw it differently all the time. You want to throw it the same way.
Right.
The only time you want to throw it differently in football is if the defense demands you throw it differently.
Sure.
Otherwise, you should look the same throwing the ball all the time.
Right. All right, Greg, we'll finish with this one last guy. I like to call him the Drew Brees of small college football. I think he had
Bailey Zappi?
67 touchdowns or something in his last year from Western Kentucky. Bailey Zappi.
Yeah, but, again, you get into those offenses in college football where everything is quick. The ball comes out to receivers who are never pressed, and it becomes pitch and catch. Now, I will say this. I actually read, Adam, my transition the other day, and I kind of liked Zappi. I thought that obviously the offense featured a high percentage of schemed, manufactured, one-read, no-read throws, but there were times he showed the ability to work progressions and make throws that demanded higher level timing. He did do that. He certainly had outstanding command of his offense, which, by the way, he's been running for years, because if I'm not mistaken, didn't the coach that he had at Houston Baptist come with him to Western Kentucky? I think that's the case. Somebody could tell me if I'm wrong.
Sounds correct. Yeah, that sounds correct.
Is that correct, Adam?
Well, I know this. That Houston Baptist, I don't know what the record for most yardage in a season is. He had to set it for any level.
But the point is, he had great command of his offense.
Okay. Good.
He knew all the route concepts. He knew where to go with the ball. But there was a lot of pitch and catch involved. I mean, it was pretty base. That's what you get. I mean, he'll have some significant challenge challenges in the NFL because that high percentage passing game he ran at Western Kentucky, he threw a lot to open receivers. In what, like I said, it was pitch and catch. To me, I think he falls into the Colt McCoy, Case Keenum, Taylor Heineke mold as you project him to the league. He could probably play for 12 years. He could probably start somewhere along the line, and you could probably put him out there and he'd be okay.
Yeah, you're correct, by the way, that Ben Arbuckle, who is their offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, came from the college that you had mentioned.
So there you go. I mean, it was evident watching the tape. He just had total command of that offense. Total command.
Yeah. Why do I get the feeling this kid's going to have to come in at some point, maybe first year, second year, for a quarterback who gets hurt, and people are going to be entranced by his accuracy, his ability to just move the chains methodically, and that's going to be almost Gardner Minshew without the athleticism, maybe.
I just mentioned that to Greg the other day. It's so funny you mentioned that.
Yeah, and it's like Taylor Heineke, who this year threw about 20 touchdown passes and started most of the season, and certainly acquitted himself perfectly fine. Although my guess is that no one would say he's my starter going forward and he's the guy. I think Bailey Zappi will fall into that same category. Case Keenum was the quarterback the year the Eagles beat Minnesota in the NFC Championship game, had a really nice season. Those guys can play in the league and they can have success depending on other determining factors.
Absolutely.
All right. That was great quarterback conversation there, Greg. Really appreciate it. Awesome stuff. Great breakdowns. Really fascinated, actually, by this quarterback. I'm almost fascinated by it because its lack of accolade and pomp compared to other quarterback classes. So I want to see.
But
where
I thought
these
it was
guys wind
important
up
to give
going.
a context for all this, Geoff, because
Sure.
You have to, with any position, it's just quarterback's the most visible and the most important. What are we doing? We're projecting and transitioning guys to the NFL.
It's hard.
So you have to think how guys who are good at what they do in the NFL, why are they good at what they do in the NFL? There's a lot of people who can watch Lamar Jackson at Louisville and say, you know what, he's fast. That doesn't really add to the discourse. You've got to talk about what's required to play at a relatively high level at the NFL.
And by the way, Lamar, not that he's a world-class passer, but you saw him progress.
Yes.
Greg Roman, great coaching as a passer. He made some great touch throws over time. No
question.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, they told you by what they did with him early that they thought the best way to play was to minimize his passing. Mm-hmm. They told you that. We don't have to interpret that. I happen to know it for a fact because I know coaches, but they told you that by how they played.
There you go.
So, we'll see. But I'm fascinated by this group just because of what I do. I mean, obviously, it's not considered anything like a year ago. We're not going to have 5 quarterbacks in the top 15. But, hey, it wouldn't surprise me if 4 go in the first round. Who knows? Maybe 5 go in the first. Maybe a team all of a sudden says, I mean, look, Lamar Jackson at the time wasn't considered a first-round pick, really, and Baltimore then trades back to pick him with the last pick in the first round. So you never know if a quarterback-needy team all of a sudden says, you know what, I'm not really comfortable with the guy we're going to line up with, so let me trade back in and get a guy. You never know.
3 years later, he's the NFL MVP, and that's the story of the position.
And Adam's point about coaching, I'm such a firm believer in that. Such a firm believer.
Yeah,
you got to have a plan. One more thing before we get out of here, there's got to be a plan, and the front office has to have have great conversations and talks with the coaches, because you got to be realistic with your expectations when you have a young quarterback who's not been developed at the college level. It doesn't happen by snapping your fingers. Like you mentioned, the plan with Lamar Jackson worked. They came out running the ball. He became the big part of the run game. Over time, he became more of a passer. That's great. But if you don't have a plan, you'd be shocked. We all know this, and fans at home are watching know this.
See, I think a great team to watch, and obviously the Eagles played him this past year. I don't think they play him this coming year, is the Jets. Because Zach Wilson has quote-unquote traits. No question. Mm-hmm. He has traits. He's got much to learn, but he's a classic case. And obviously the Greg Knapp situation was horrible. Yes. Beyond football, obviously. But with a quarterback like that, to me, you have got to keep continuity. You've got to let the same people coach him. You've got to develop a relationship. You know, you can't keep changing with young quarterbacks. It's just too hard.
Yeah, that's true. And plus systems, right? Because that's what Jason Campbell talked about. Former Auburn quarterback was the
Yep.
first rounder.
Yeah.
Coach after coach after coach after coach, and Hurts here in Philly. You know, he's rarely played the same offense back to back. So it is. You make a great point. Before we get out of here, continuity is king. There's no question.
Key. It's key.
All right. Well, that was great quarterback discussion. We're going to have another great discussion again next week when we bring Greg Cosell back. So for Adam Caplan and Greg Cosell, I'm Geoff Mosher, and you've been watching The Intel with Greg Cosell.